In the crushing depths of the Pacific, one man faced a choice no manual ever covered. 700 feet below, 48 hours of oxygen left. One impossible escape from a steel coffin. This is the story of the day. Physics lost and a captain became a legend. Screams as the ocean tries to reclaim what doesn't belong to it. Every rivet in the engine room is a ticking time bomb waiting to explode inward. At this depth, the pressure is enough to turn a human body into a memory. Meet the man they called Captain Impossible, a leader defined by cold calculation. The odds were 1,000 to 1 against survival, but he didn't believe in the concept of luck. He believed in the steel of his ship and the nerves of his sailors. Military analysts said it couldn't be done due to the structural limits of the steel. The blueprints dictated that at this depth, the submarine should have been a pancake. But blueprints don't account for the tactical genius of a desperate commander. On June 14th, 1944, the map of the Pacific was rewritten in the Sibian Sea. A routine patrol turned into a fight for the very soul of the American submarine fleet. The captain found himself in the crosshairs of Japan's most elites in a shallow bay with active depth charges raining down from the surface. The Japanese hunter-killer groups were closing the circle with terrifying mathematical precision. They had the sonar, the speed, and the firepower to end this story in seconds. What happened in the next 3 hours would completely rewrite global naval doctrine. It wasn't just a battle of ships, it was a battle of human endurance and technical mastery. Every expert predicted total failure, yet the captain remained silent and focused. Captain Impossible didn't just survive, he executed a maneuver that defied the laws of gravity. He turned the very ocean floor against those who thought they owned the surface. It was a move so bold, even his own crew thought he had lost his mind. The method he used, it remains a mystery element taught at top naval academies today. It required a level of technical mastery that few men in history have ever possessed. The margin for error was less than the width of a human hair. The moment he figured it out at Mini 42 is a masterclass in strategic brilliance. Notice the silence. It's the sound of a genius at work under the ultimate pressure. And what he did next, nobody in the Japanese Navy saw it. Here is what nobody knew. The hunter was about to become the prey. The Japanese commander thought he had a kill, but he was holding a tiger by the tail. By the end of this hour, only one of them would still be afloat. Our story begins in the early hours of June 14th, 1944, in the Philippine interior. The water was glass, hiding the chaos that was brewing just beneath the sapphire surface. The submarine was running on the surface, recharging batteries for the day's hunt. The captain was a veteran of 3 patrols, known for his impossible survival streak. He had a reputation for seeing things on the radar that his junior officers often missed. He sensed a change in the water before the sonar ever pinged. His crew was exhausted, their spirits dampened by weeks of silent running in heat. They trusted the man at the helm, but even trust has its breaking point in a steel tube. The air was thick with the smell of diesel, grease, and anticipation. They were hunting a convoy, unaware that a specialized anti-subdivision was waiting. The Japanese had developed a new sonar frequency that the US didn't know existed yet. They were sailing into a technological ambush designed to be an escape. 0800 hours. The first ping of active sonar echoed through the steel hull. It's a sharp, metallic sound that haunts the dreams of every submariner who ever lived. The captain didn't blink. He simply ordered, "Rig for depth charge attack." 3 destroyers moved into a cloverleaf search pattern to box the submarine in. The ocean was suddenly filled with the sound of churning propellers and imminent death. The first salvo was dropped far away, but the range was closing fast. The captain ordered, "Take her down," but the charts were dangerously wrong. The seabed was rising much faster than the navigation officer had anticipated in the dark. They were running out of vertical room to hide from the explosions above. They were sitting ducks on the ocean floor, trapped in a silty, underwater graveyard. With only 150 feet of water above them, there was nowhere left to dive to escape. The silt on the bottom began to swirl as the sub's weight settled into the mud. The first depth charge exploded at 0815, rocking the ship to its very foundation. The captain looked at his watch. He knew they had less than 2 hours of power left. If they didn't move soon, the sub would become their permanent tomb. Notice what happens next. As the oxygen fails, the captain makes a radical choice. He didn't just want to hide. He wanted to vanish from the face of the earth. The next decision would either save the crew or seal their fate. The pressure was mounting, forcing seawater through the packing of the propeller shafts. Every drop hitting the floor plates was a reminder that the ocean was trying to get in. The pumps were turned off to keep the sub silent, letting the water rise. One man began to panic, the psychological weight of the depth becoming too much. The captain placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Leadership is often found in a quiet touch. No one spoke. Even the drop of a wrench could signal their position to the destroyers. Over 50 depth charges had fallen in the last hour, shaking the very earth beneath them. The crew sat and rigged for ultra-quiet, with all fans and air conditioning killed. The temperature inside the boat began to climb toward a staggering 110 degrees. The enemy knew the general area. They were systematically mowing the lawn with sonar. It was a mathematical certainty that the next salvo would be the final, fatal one. The Japanese commander was a specialist in shallow water kills. Standard procedure said to stay quiet and wait for the cover of nightfall. But the captain knew nightfall was too far away for their current oxygen levels. He decided to break every rule in the U.S. Navy handbook at once. He realized the destroyers were timing their drops based on the sub's predicted drift. The Japanese were using a linear model, but the captain was thinking three-dimensional. He saw the floor of the bay not as a trap, but as a springboard. Did something insane. He ordered the engines to full reverse, while still grounded. The hull groaned and screamed as the propellers fought against the thick sand. It was a gamble that could have snapped the shafts and ended it all. He was creating a massive cloud of debris to mask their acoustic signature. Under the water, a massive storm of sand was blinding the Japanese active sonar. The enemy sonar pings were hitting the sand cloud and bouncing back in a mess. He saw a gap in the search pattern that lasted for only 10 fleeting seconds. He whispered to the helm, "This is it. Get ready to fly." The next 60 seconds would decide if they lived or died in the dark. The next 60 seconds would change everything. Would the hull hold or shatter? This was the moment where physics met fate in the middle of the Submarine Sea. If the tanks didn't blow, the sub would be pinned to the bottom forever. The charge landed within 30 yards. Blowing the main electrical breakers, the sub plunged into a darkness so thick you could feel the weight on your skin. The only light came from the sparks of short-circuiting electrical panels. The air was thick with the smell of scorched insulation and human sweat. Men worked by memory and touch, their hands knowing every valve by heart. The chief engineer signaled, "Air pressure holding. We are ready." "Captain," he whispered the order. "Blow all tanks. Emergency surface." The compressed air roared into the ballast tanks with a sound like a screaming jet. The submarine lurched upward, breaking the suction of the seafloor mud. This was the impossible escape, an action ascending directly into the enemy's lap. The Japanese never expected a submarine to attack from the surface in broad daylight. They thought the submarine was disabled and dying on the bottom. It breached like a prehistoric monster, water cascading off the deck. They were less than 500 yards from the lead Japanese destroyer, the Hayanami. The sun was blinding after the hours of darkness in the deep. The captain was the first man out, his lungs burning from the fresh sea air. He saw the Japanese sailors on the destroyer's deck frozen in a state of total shock. They hadn't even manned their close-range guns yet. He grabbed the bridge's mounted machine gun and began to suppress the enemy deck. The destroyer tried to turn its massive 5-inch guns, but the range was too close. The shells were flying over the submarine, unable to hit the low-profile target. Because of the steep angle, the destroyer's guns couldn't point low enough to hit. The captain had positioned the sub in the safe zone of the enemy's own shadow. It was a tactical flaw he had studied and memorized years before the war. Wait until you see what happens next. He wasn't just running for his life. He was positioning himself for the most audacious counterstrike of the entire war. The prey was about to show the hunter exactly what it was capable of. Wait until you see what happens next. The prey just grew teeth. In a world of giants, the smallest bite is often the most lethal. Captain Impossible was about to turn the Submarine Sea into a Japanese graveyard and peered through the attack periscope, his hand steady as stone. He was looking at the vulnerable fuel bunkers and magazine of the Japanese ship. He called out the coordinates with the calmness of a man ordering dinner. 3 torpedoes left the bow tubes, their wakes cutting through the blue water. The distance was so short the torpedoes almost didn't have time to arm their warheads. The Japanese commander on the bridge could only watch his doom approach. The Hainami erupted into a spectacular pillar of fire and twisted metal. The very ship that had been dropping death on them was now sinking in minutes. The secondary explosions from the magazine lit up the morning sky. The remaining 2 destroyers were thrown into a state of total tactical chaos. They began firing wildly into the smoke of their burning sister ship, hitting nothing. The captain had successfully shattered their coordination with one blow. The captain saw his opening and didn't hesitate for a single second. "Take her down. Take her deep," he yelled over the roar of the burning ship. The submarine slipped beneath the waves, while the enemy was still blinded by smoke. The submarine vanished back into the depths, as the enemy fire splashed harmlessly behind. They had used the chaos of their own attack to create a screen for their exit, but the sub was hurt, and the journey back was far from over. The atmosphere inside had shifted from a funeral to a victory celebration, but the captain knew they were still leaking oil, leaving a trail for the enemy. The victory was sweet, but the survival was still in question. That's 1 destroyer gone, but the other 2 were regaining their senses. They began a coordinated sonar sweep, searching for the telltale oil slick. The captain knew he couldn't outrun them with a damaged fuel tank. This is where it gets really interesting, because he had one more trick. He was about to play a game of shells with the entire Japanese Navy, and the prize for winning was his life and the lives of 80 men. This is where it gets really interesting. The sub was dying from within. Even without the enemy, the sea was slowly claiming the damaged vessel. If they didn't stop the leak, the destroyers would find them by sunset. The fuel tank had been punctured during the initial depth charge attack. Every mile they traveled, they left a neon sign on the surface for the enemy to follow. The Japanese destroyers were closing the distance, following the scent of oil. The captain looked at the manifold and saw a way to turn a leak into a weapon. He ordered the crew to pump all remaining waste oil and trash into the ballast tanks. He was preparing to stage his own death for the cameras of the enemy. He released a massive bubble of oil, clothing, and deck gear to simulate a sinking. To the Japanese ships above, it looked like the submarine had finally imploded. The oil slick grew into a massive, shimmering circle on the ocean surface. The destroyers stopped their search and began circling the debris field. They dropped a final victory depth charge and moved off to report the kill to Tokyo. The Japanese commander was convinced he had sent the captain to the bottom. Underneath them, the captain had cut all power to the main electric motors. They were drifting like a ghost, carried by the deep currents of the Philippine Strait. They were invisible, silent, and for the first time in hours, safe. The tide was moving at 3 knots, pulling them toward the open Pacific Sea. Every foot they moved was a foot closer to the deep water safety of the trench. The crew sat in total darkness, listening to the ocean's heartbeat. He had memorized the thermal layers of the Sibuyan Sea. Before the patrol began, he found a pocket of cold water that bounced sonar pings away like a glass mirror. He was using the ocean's own temperature to hide his broken ship. At 0200 hours, they finally reached the 1,000-fathom curve. The ocean floor fell away into a dark abyss, where no destroyer could ever reach them. The captain finally stood up and said, "Engage main motors. Let's go home." They were finally safe. The impossible escape was now a matter of record. The captain had outthought, outmaneuvered, and outlived the elite of the IJN. But the journey back to Pearl Harbor would reveal the true cost of the fight. But the story doesn't end with the escape. The real impact was felt in Washington. Intelligence officers couldn't explain how a sunk submarine had returned to port. What they found inside the hull would change the way we build ships forever. The submarine finally arrived. The dockworkers fell into a stunned silence. The ship looked like it had been through a trash compactor and somehow survived. The hull was covered in scars, and the bridge was riddled with bullet holes. The hull was indented by inches, a physical map of the pressure they had faced. Engineers claimed that by all laws of physics, the boat should have been at the bottom. The captain just shrugged and handed them his mission report. Captain Impossible was summoned to a secret briefing with the Pacific High Command. He was awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in the face of certain death. His crew was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation for their bravery. The citation noted his extraordinary heroism and total disregard for established limits. It wasn't just about bravery. It was about the tactical evolution of the entire Navy. He had proven that a submarine was more than just a defensive weapon. Debris cloud and shallow water breach tactics were immediately codified. Young officers began studying the Sibuyan maneuver as the gold standard of survival. The captain's name became synonymous with thinking outside the steel box. Before this, shallow water was considered a death sentence for a submarine. After this, it became a tactical playground for the most daring American commanders. The Japanese never quite figured out how to counter the maneuver. Ayanami remains on the seabed, a silent witness to the captain's genius. It stands as a warning to history. Never underestimate a cornered predator. The wreckage is now a protected war grave in the Philippine waters. The survival rate for U.S. crews increased significantly following the adoption of his methods. Innovation, it turned out, was more effective than any heavy armor plating. The captain had saved hundreds of lives he would never even meet. Here's why this matters today. It wasn't just about a boat. It was about the human will. The captain proved that even in a steel tube, the mind is the ultimate weapon. He turned the impossible into a standard operating procedure. Here's why this matters today. Even in the age of AI, this lesson remains vital. The bravest decisions aren't made by algorithms. They are made by people under pressure. And the impossible escape is still the ultimate case study in crisis management. Today's nuclear commanders still practiced emergency surface drills inspired by 1944. The physics of the ocean haven't changed, and neither has the need for guts. The shadow of the captain still walks the decks of the modern fleet. We see the captain's influence in every stealth maneuver used in modern warfare. He taught us that the best way to hide is often to do exactly what the enemy deems impossible. He used the environment as an extension of his own weapons system. The captain spent his final years at the Naval War College, passing on the torch. He never called himself a hero, he called himself a problem solver with a deadline. His students went on to command the nuclear fleet during the Cold War. 5 decisions, 3 hours of terror, 1 saved crew. That is the mathematics of leadership. When the world is literally crashing in on you, it is a legacy written in salt water and cold, hard steel. That's 1 down. But that single kill changed the momentum of the Philippine campaign. The Japanese had to pull destroyers from the front lines just to guard their supply routes. 1 boat had paralyzed an entire regional command of the agent. By the end of the war, he had sent over 30,000 tons of enemy shipping to the bottom. But when asked about his career, he only ever talked about those 3 hours in the bay. He measured his success by the lives he brought home, not the ships he sank. Somewhere beneath these waves, the wreckage of his pursuers still sits in the dark. They are metallic echoes of a day when the impossible happened twice before lunch. The ocean remembers the struggle, even if the world has moved on. He looked at the impossible and saw a staircase to survival. That is the hallmark of a legenda. Ability to see a door where everyone else sees a wall. His eyes never lost that look of quiet, calculating intensity. In the darkest moments, the bravest find a way to make their own light. But what happened to the crew after they returned? The secret they kept is even more shocking. Stay tuned, because the final chapter of this escape changes everything we know. For years, the crew didn't speak of the psychological toll of the silence. Sitting on the bottom, listening to the clicks of depth charges, changes a man forever. They lived a lifetime in those 3 hours under the Sibuyan Sea. Every man on that boat was offered a transfer to shore duty after the escape. Not a single one took it. They chose to stay with the captain who brought them back. They had become a family forged in the heat of a pressurized steel coffin. They became known as the ghost crewmen who had seen the bottom and returned. Their bond was forged in the 150 feet of silt and shadow that should have been their grave. They held an annual reunion for 50 years, never missing a single date. The captain kept a list of every man's name in his pocket for the rest of his life. He knew that his brilliant tactic would have failed without their perfect, silent execution. He credited his men with every medal he ever wore on his chest. The U.S. Navy used the data from their crushed hull to build much stronger submarines. The trauma of 1 boat became the blueprint for the safety of 1,000 others. They were the unintended pioneers of deep-sea structural engineering. We learned how to build better ships by studying how close his boat came to breaking. The impossible escape provided the most valuable structural data in naval history. It was a lesson paid for in terror and learned in the safety of the lab. It's a reminder that sometimes failure or near failure is the best teacher, but you have to survive the lesson first to tell the world about it. The captain was the world's most successful student of the deep. Most of the crew is gone now, but the Submarine spirit lives on in every new diver. They are the silent sentinels of the deep, defined by a single morning in 1944. Their story is carved into the history of the U.S. Navy forever. The next time you look at the ocean, remember the man who refused to stay down. Remember the captain who looked at a death sentence and called it an opportunity. The sea is vast, but the human spirit is deeper still. Here's the ultimate lesson from the man who escaped the impossible. Innovation is the only real weapon against a certain defeat. If you enjoyed this deep dive into tactical genius, you're going to love what's next. We study these stories not just for history, but for the tactics that save lives today. The Submarine maneuver remains the perfect example of calm under extreme pressure. It is a blueprint for any leader facing a crisis they weren't trained for. The sand cloud, the emergency breach, the close-range torpedo strike. It was a symphony of violence and intelligence performed in a shallow bay, and it is a story that deserves to be remembered by every generation. The captain's Navy Cross sits in a museum now, but his tactics are in the water. He changed the world from the inside of a sinking boat. That is the power of a single mind when it refuses to accept defeat. The core lesson of the impossible escape. Never let the impossible dictate your next move. The moment you stop believing the rules of failure is the moment you win. The captain didn't play the enemy's game. He made them play his. If you want more stories of tactical innovation against impossible odds, hit subscribe. We bring you the stories that history almost forgot, but tactics will never lose. Join our community of history buffs and strategic thinkers today. Next week, the pilot who landed a plane with only one wing. You won't believe the physics. It's another story of a man who refused to believe the manual. Make sure your notifications are on so you don't miss that flight. I'm Gemini, and this was the Submarine Captain's Impossible Escape. Thank you for watching the full story of the man who beat the ocean. We'll see you in the next deep dive into military history. Rest in peace to the crew of the USS Submarine name. Your courage in the dark continues to light the way for us all. Fair winds and following seas to the legends of the Submarine Sea. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Until next time, keep looking for the exit when the world says there isn't one, because impossible is just a word for a problem not yet solved. Stay sharp, stay curious, and stay brave.